Ladies and gentlemen, if you have ever wondered how family greed can poison even the strongest bonds, please hit that subscribe button for her light, because today's story will shake you to your core. This isn't just about money or property. It is about how one elderly woman discovered her own son's darkest secret, and how she fought back with weapons he never saw coming. Please comment below and let me know. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what is right? Your stories matter too, and I read every single one. My name is Margaret Sullivan, and I am 67 years old. I live in the mountains of Pennsylvania, where the autumn leaves turn gold, like old wedding rings, and the morning mist clings to valleys older than memory. For 43 years, I called this place home with my late husband Patrick and our 2 children, Michael, my eldest, and my precious daughter Catherine. Patrick passed away 6 years ago from lung cancer. He was a carpenter, the kind of man who could build anything from scratch: birdhouses, kitchen cabinets, dreams. Our house sits on 12 acres of wooded land that his grandfather bought in 1952 for $800. Every penny saved from working in the coal mines, rolling hills, a small creek that runs clear, even after heavy rain, and a stone cottage that Patrick spent decades perfecting. Every beam, every window frame, every porch step was crafted by his hands with the patient precision of someone who understood that good things take time. The property has appreciated enormously over the decades. What Patrick's grandfather bought for $800 is now worth nearly $2.4 million. According to recent appraisals, the main house is a 3-bedroom stone structure with wide pine floors and hand-hewn beams that Patrick restored himself. A smaller guest cottage sits near the creek, originally built as servant quarters in the 1920s, but converted into Patrick's workshop. The barn, though no longer housing livestock, provides storage and could easily be converted into additional living space. But the real value lies in the land itself: 12 pristine acres with creek frontage, mountain views, and complete privacy. Pittsburgh developers have been circling like vultures for years, offering astronomical sums for properties they could subdivide into luxury vacation homes. The location is perfect, close enough to the city for weekend getaways, remote enough for privacy, scenic enough to command premium prices. Michael is 38 now, works in Pittsburgh as a real estate developer, married to a woman named Stephanie, who wears designer everything and speaks in a voice that sounds like she is perpetually annoyed by the world's failure to meet her standards. They live in an ostentatious McMansion in an exclusive suburb, the kind of place where lawn care is a competitive sport and holiday decorations are judged by homeowner association committees. Michael's company, Sullivan Development Group, specializes in converting rural properties into upscale residential communities. He has made millions transforming farmland into cul-de-sacs, old estates into gated neighborhoods. His success has made him arrogant, convinced that everything can be bought, sold, or manipulated for profit. He drives a silver BMW that costs more than most people's houses and wears suits that cost more than Patrick used to make in a month. They visit maybe twice a year, always in a hurry, always checking their phones. Michael walks through our house like he is conducting an appraisal, commenting on which walls could be removed, which rooms could be expanded, how the kitchen could be updated for modern buyers. He never sees the home Patrick built with love. He only sees square footage and market potential. Stephanie follows behind him, noting aloud which furniture is outdated, which decorations are embarrassing, which family photos should be relegated to storage. She has opinions about everything: the faded wallpaper in the guest room, the cast iron radiators that Patrick refused to replace, the wide front porch that she considers wasted space. During their visits, she spends most of her time in the car, making business calls and complaining about poor cell phone reception. But Catherine, my beautiful, gentle Catherine, was different. She was 32 when she died, though in my heart she remains frozen at every age I ever knew her. As a child, she collected smooth stones from our creek and painted tiny faces on them. She called them her worry stones, claimed they could absorb sadness if you held them long enough. She would arrange them in careful patterns on her bedroom windowsill, creating elaborate stories about their personalities and adventures. As a teenager, she wrote poetry on napkins during dinner, verses about thunderstorms and forgotten songs. Her room was filled with notebooks, some containing poems, others sketching wildlife, still others documenting her dreams and fears with the brutal honesty that only teenage girls possess. She won the county poetry contest 3 years running, but never considered herself particularly talented. "Words just come to me," she would say with characteristic modesty. In college, she studied environmental science because she wanted to save the world one watershed at a time. Her professors adored her passion for fieldwork, her ability to spot ecological problems that others missed, her talent for explaining complex environmental concepts to non-scientists. She graduated summa cum laude with a thesis on stream pollution in Industrial Pennsylvania that was published in 2 academic journals. Catherine never left home for long. After graduation, she moved back to help care for Patrick during his illness. She slept on a cot beside his hospital bed those final weeks, reading him passages from his favorite westerns when the morphine made conversation impossible. Her voice was steady and soothing, never betraying the fear that must have been eating her alive as she watched her father fade. After Patrick died, she stayed to take care of me, though I insisted I didn't need care. "Mom," she would say with that gentle smile that could disarm any argument, "this isn't about what you need. It is about what I need. I need to be here, with you, in the place Dad built for us." She worked remotely for a conservation nonprofit, earned enough to cover her expenses, and spent her evenings teaching me how to use the computer Patrick had never trusted. The creek behind our house became Catherine's sanctuary. She installed a small wooden dock that Patrick had started but never finished, completing his vision with the same attention to detail he had always demanded. Summer evenings, she had sit there with her laptop, writing grant proposals for environmental projects or sketching wildlife with remarkable precision. She documented every bird species that visited our property, 47 different types over the years, from common cardinals to rare pileated woodpeckers. Her field notebooks filled an entire bookshelf in the living room, each one meticulously organized with dates, weather conditions, and detailed observations. She could identify bird calls from 50 yards away, predict weather changes by watching animal behavior, spot environmental problems that trained scientists missed. The local university occasionally hired her as a consulting researcher, and her reports were so thorough that they became models for other field studies. Michael always seemed irritated by Catherine's contentment with simple things. During family dinners, he would pepper her with questions about career advancement, salary increases, 5-year plans. "Don't you want more than this?" he would ask, gesturing dismissively at our modest surroundings. "Don't you want to travel, live in a real city, make real money?" Catherine would smile and redirect the conversation to his latest property deals or Stephanie's shopping adventures. She never fought with anyone. She absorbed tension the way her painted stones absorbed worry quietly, without complaint, until the heaviness settled deep inside where no one could see it. But I saw the way her hands trembled slightly when Michael talked about money, the way her smile never quite reached her eyes when he outlined his visions for our property's development potential. The night Catherine disappeared, frost had begun forming on the windows. October in Pennsylvania arrives with sharp teeth and crisp promises. She had spent the afternoon raking leaves into enormous piles, humming old folk songs while she worked. I watched her from the kitchen window, admiring how she moved with such purpose, such grace, even performing mundane chores. She wore her favorite flannel shirt, the red one with pearl snaps that had belonged to Patrick, and her faded jeans with paint stains from the summer we had repainted the guest cottage together. Around 7 of the clock, her phone rang. She glanced at the caller ID and frowned slightly. "It is Michael," she said, answering with her usual warmth. "Hey, big brother, what is going on?" I couldn't hear his side of the conversation. But Catherine's expression shifted. Her smile faded. She asked him to repeat something, then said she would be right there. She grabbed her thick wool coat, the navy one with wooden buttons that she had owned since college. The coat had a small moth hole near the left pocket that she had never bothered to mend, claiming it gave the garment character. "Michael needs help with something at the old Miller place," she explained, kissing my forehead. The Miller property was a rundown farmhouse about 10 miles north, something Michael had been trying to buy for months. "I will be back before 9. Don't wait up if I am late. You know how Michael likes to talk business." That was the last time I saw my daughter alive. The state police found her car the next morning, wrapped around an oak tree on Hollow Road, a winding stretch of asphalt that Catherine knew better than her own name. The vehicle had burned completely. The fire was so intense that dental records were required for identification. The investigating officer, a kind young man named Detective Ross, explained that sometimes traumatic accidents caused fuel lines to rupture, creating devastating fires that consumed everything. But Catherine was the most careful driver I had ever known. She drove slowly in bad weather, always wore her seatbelt, never used her phone behind the wheel. She kept emergency supplies in her trunk, blankets, water, flares, jumper cables, and checked her tire pressure monthly. And Hollow Road? She had traveled that route hundreds of times to visit friends in town. She could navigate it blindfolded, knew every curve and pothole like an old friend. The accident reconstruction team concluded that Catherine had been driving too fast for conditions, lost control on a sharp curve, and struck the tree at approximately 45 miles per hour. The subsequent fire had destroyed most physical evidence, but they found no indication of mechanical failure or external factors. The case was classified as accidental death due to driver error. Michael handled all the funeral arrangements. He said I was too distraught to make coherent decisions, which was partially true. Grief had wrapped around my mind like fog, making simple thoughts difficult to grasp. He organized a small service at the Presbyterian church, selected a closed casket, chose flowers and music without consulting me. Stephanie stood beside him during the ceremony, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief while occasionally checking her manicured nails. The funeral felt strange, disconnected from the daughter I had known. Michael had chosen white lilies instead of the wildflowers Catherine loved. He had selected hymns she had never heard instead of the folk songs she hummed while working in the garden. The pastor, who barely knew Catherine, delivered a generic eulogy about young lives, cut short, and God's mysterious plans. I sat in the front pew, surrounded by people offering condolences, feeling like I was attending a stranger's funeral. 3 weeks after Catherine's funeral, Michael presented me with paperwork. "Legal stuff," he said, spreading documents across my kitchen table like he was dealing cards. The papers were dense with legal terminology that hurt my eyes to read. Michael explained that transferring the property into his name would provide tax benefits and ensure I had never have to worry about estate planning again. "Look, Mom," he said, pointing to specific clauses with a gold pen that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. "Dad's will is outdated now that Catherine's gone. The inheritance structure needs updating to reflect current family circumstances. This transfer protects you from estate taxes, capital gains issues, all that complicated financial stuff that would just stress you out." He spread out property appraisals, tax documents, and legal opinions that painted a picture of mounting financial obligations. According to his calculations, I owed thousands in back taxes, faced penalties for improper estate management, and could lose the property entirely if legal issues weren't resolved immediately. "You will live here as long as you want," he promised, his voice carrying the same tone he had used as a child when trying to convince me that breaking the neighbor's window had been an accident. "This is your home forever. But legally, it makes sense for me to hold the deed. Stephanie and I can manage the finances, handle maintenance issues, deal with all that complicated business stuff. You will not have to worry about anything." The documents looked official. Intimidating, Michael's explanations sounded reasonable, even caring. I trusted him because he was my son, because I couldn't imagine a world where my own child would lie to me about something so fundamental, because grief had made me vulnerable to manipulation by someone who understood exactly which emotional buttons to push. I signed the papers with a shaking hand, using Patrick's old fountain pen that barely worked anymore. Michael witnessed my signature with obvious satisfaction, gathering the documents immediately, and promising to file everything with the appropriate authorities. "You are doing the right thing, Mom," he said, kissing my cheek. "Dad would be proud of how responsible you are being." 3 months later, I received an eviction notice in the mail. The letter was typed on official letterhead from Sullivan Development Group, Michael's real estate company. Due to necessary property development and restructuring, current residence arrangements must be terminated within 30 days. Alternative housing options will be discussed at your earliest convenience. It was signed by Michael Sullivan, property manager, as if I were a tenant he would never met, rather than the mother who had given him life. When I called him, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial the number. Stephanie answered his phone. "Oh, Margaret," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy like honey laced with poison. "Michael's in meetings all day. But yes, we received the lawyer's advice about the situation. You really cannot stay in that big house alone anymore. It is not safe for someone your age. We have found a lovely assisted living facility in town, much more appropriate for your current needs. Assisted living for a woman who still climbed ladders to clean gutters, who could split firewood and drive stick shift and remember every birthday in a 40-person church congregation. They wanted to warehouse me among other discarded elderly people while they sold the land Patrick's grandfather had bought with his life savings from years of backbreaking work in dangerous mines. The facility Stephanie had chosen was called Golden Years Manor, a sterile complex with beige walls and the smell of industrial disinfectant that couldn't quite mask underlying odors of despair and neglect. During the tour, residents sat in wheelchairs along the hallways, staring at nothing with eyes that had given up hope. The activities director enthusiastically described bingo nights and craft sessions, as if my entire existence could be condensed into scheduled entertainment designed to keep elderly people quiet and manageable. My room would be 12 feet by 10 feet, barely large enough for a bed and a dresser. No cooking allowed, except for a small microwave that management could monitor. No pets, no overnight guests. Visiting hours ended at 8 of the clock sharp. Meals were served in a common dining room, where conversations were discouraged, and television played constantly at volumes designed for the hearing impaired. "Think of it as a new adventure," Michael said when he came to discuss the arrangements. We sat in the living room, where Catherine had spent her last evening, surrounded by her field notebooks and Patrick's handmade furniture. "You will make friends, join activities. No more worrying about property taxes or repairs or snow removal. No more rattling around alone in this big empty house." I looked at my son. This man I had carried in my body for 9 months, nursed through fevers and nightmares, taught to tie shoes and ride bicycles and treat others with kindness. His eyes had grown cold, calculating. He kept checking his Rolex as if my emotional devastation was a minor inconvenience, preventing him from more important appointments. "What about Catherine's things?" I asked. My voice barely above a whisper. Her bedroom remained exactly as she had left it. Books scattered on the nightstand, watercolor paintings thumbtacked to the walls, the scent of her lavender soap still lingering on the pillowcases like a ghost of normal life. "Stephanie's already sorted through everything," Michael replied with casual brutality. "Clothes went to charity. Personal items are boxed in the basement storage room. You can take a few sentimental pieces to your new place, but space will be limited. The assisted living facility has strict policies about personal belongings." They had erased my daughter's physical presence without asking permission, as if her possessions were merely clutter to be discarded by people who had never bothered to understand her gentle spirit. Catherine's painted worry stones, her nature journals, her half-finished poetry manuscript, her collection of pressed flowers, all deemed insignificant by people who measured worth in dollars rather than memories. "Besides," Stephanie added, entering the conversation with the timing of someone who had been listening from the hallway, "it is not healthy to maintain shrine-like spaces. Grief counselors recommend removing triggers that prevent emotional healing. We are actually helping you move forward." The psychological manipulation was breathtaking. They were stealing my daughter's memory while claiming it was therapeutic. They were destroying my home while insisting it was protective. They were isolating me from everything familiar while describing it as social enrichment. The next morning, I walked down to Catherine's dock by the creek. Frost sparkled on the wooden planks like scattered diamonds. I sat where she used to sit, watching water flow over stones worn smooth by decades of current. The silence was profound, broken only by wind through bare branches and the distant call of a red-tailed hawk that Catherine had named Henry. That is when I noticed something odd. Tucked beneath the dock's edge, wrapped in plastic and secured with duct tape, was a small waterproof container that definitely hadn't been there before. Inside, I found Catherine's backup laptop and a spiral notebook I had never seen, labeled insurance in her careful handwriting. The notebook's pages were filled with her familiar script, but the content made my blood freeze. M has been asking questions about the property value. One entry read, "Called 3 different appraisers in the past month. He seems angry that Dad left everything equally between us. Stephanie keeps mentioning how much the land could be worth if developed into vacation homes." Another page, M called 3 times this week about power of attorney documents. Says I should sign papers giving him legal authority to make medical decisions for Mom. Claims it is just preparation for emergencies. But something feels wrong. Why the sudden urgency? A later entry found out M owes money to some very dangerous people. His last 3 development projects failed spectacularly. He has been using client deposits to pay personal debts. If the state licensing board finds out, he will lose everything. No wonder he is desperate to sell our property. The final entry was dated the day before she died, meeting M tonight at Miller Place. He says he has a buyer for the entire property, including our house. Wants me to convince Mom to sell. I told him absolutely not. This is her home, her sanctuary, the place Dad built with his own hands. M got very angry, said I was being selfish, that I was preventing the family from achieving financial security. His exact words, "You are standing between me and $2 million, and I will not let that happen. I don't understand what has happened to my brother. He has become someone I don't recognize." My hands shook as I read those words. Catherine had sensed the danger, but had gone to meet him anyway, trusting in the bond that was supposed to protect siblings from each other. She had hidden this backup laptop like she was preparing for something terrible, but she had still answered his call that October night. Still believed that family loyalty meant something. The laptop contained months of research that painted a terrifying picture. Catherine had been investigating Michael's business dealings, following a trail of suspicious property acquisitions and development schemes that violated multiple state regulations. She had discovered that he was heavily in debt, that several of his investment projects had failed catastrophically, that he owed money to people who didn't accept excuses or payment plans. Our family land represented his escape route, worth nearly $2.4 million to the right developer. But more than just money, it represented legitimacy, credibility with creditors who were growing impatient with his empty promises. A successful sale would allow him to pay off debts, restart his business, and maintain the lifestyle that Stephanie demanded. But more devastating than the financial motive was what I found in the laptop's browser history. Catherine had been researching staged car accidents, reading about cases where vehicles had been deliberately set on fire to destroy evidence. She had bookmarked articles about insurance fraud and homicide investigations disguised as accidents. My brilliant daughter had been trying to solve her own murder before it happened. One folder contained detailed documentation of Michael's movements in the weeks before her death. She had tracked his visits to auto parts stores, his purchases of accelerants and timing devices, his meetings with people who specialized in making problems disappear. She had even photographed him surveying Hollow Road, measuring distances and calculating angles like an engineer planning construction. I sat on that dock until sunset, holding the notebook and staring at the water. Somewhere upstream, a beaver slapped its tail against the surface. The sound echoed through the valley like a gunshot, and I realized that Catherine was trying to tell me something from beyond the grave. She had left these clues because she had known I would eventually find them. She had trusted me to be brave enough to seek justice, but she would also left something else: a detailed plan for protecting the property from Michael's schemes. The laptop contained draft documents for establishing an irrevocable trust, research on offshore asset protection, and contact information for attorneys who specialized in elder abuse cases. Catherine had been preparing to save me from her brother's greed, even as she was documenting evidence of her own impending murder. That night, I called Detective Ross. He listened patiently as I explained about the hidden laptop and notebook. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said gently, "I understand you are still grieving, but sometimes we see patterns that aren't really there. Your son was cooperating fully with our investigation." He provided phone records showing he was at home with his wife when the accident occurred. Phone records could be manipulated by someone familiar with technology. Alibis could be manufactured by spouses willing to lie for money. But Detective Ross had already filed his report and moved on to newer cases. The official cause of Catherine's death remained accidental. Case closed, file archived in some basement storage room, where inconvenient truths go to die. I realized that, if I wanted justice for my daughter, I would have to fight for it myself. At 67 years old, with limited resources and no legal expertise, I was probably the least threatening opponent Michael could imagine, which would make my eventual victory all the more satisfying. The first step was refusing to move to Golden Years Manor. When the deadline passed, Michael showed up with a sheriff's deputy and a moving truck. I met them at the front door wearing my best dress and Patrick's wedding ring on a chain around my neck. "Madam," the deputy said, obviously uncomfortable with the situation, "I have a court order for eviction. You need to vacate the premises immediately." I handed him a folder containing documents I had spent weeks preparing with help from Catherine's research. "This eviction is based on fraudulent property transfer," I explained calmly. I was coerced into signing those papers while mentally incapacitated by grief. "My attorney has filed a motion to void the transaction." The attorney was actually my neighbor's grandson, fresh out of law school and eager to build his practice. But the paperwork was legitimate, properly notarized, and sufficient to halt the eviction proceedings pending investigation. Catherine's research had provided the legal framework for challenging Michael's actions. Michael's face went through several color changes as he read the documents: red with anger, white with shock, then a sickly green as he realized the implications. "Mom, you cannot be serious. We had an agreement. You signed the papers voluntarily." "We had a deception," I replied, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "Catherine documented everything, including your financial troubles and your pressure tactics. Did you think I had never find her research?" The deputy looked increasingly uncomfortable as he reviewed the legal filings. "I will need to see identification of the attorney who filed these motions," he said, "and verification that the documents are properly submitted to the court system. Everything checked out." The eviction was postponed pending resolution of the property dispute. Michael and Stephanie left without speaking to me, but I heard Stephanie's voice carrying across the yard like the cry of an angry crow. "Your mother is losing her mind. We need to pursue guardianship proceedings immediately." They were planning to have me declared mentally incompetent. If successful, Michael would gain control over all my decisions: medical, financial, personal. He could force me into institutionalization and sell the property without my consent. It was a brilliant strategy, except for one crucial factor he hadn't considered. I wasn't losing my mind. I was sharpening it. Over the following weeks, I documented everything with the methodical precision Catherine had taught me. I recorded phone conversations with Michael using her old digital recorder. I photographed every piece of correspondence, every legal document, every intimidation tactic. I researched guardianship laws and elder abuse statutes with the determination of someone fighting for her life. Most importantly, I made copies of Catherine's laptop files and stored them in multiple locations: safety deposit boxes, trusted neighbors, even mailed copies to myself with return receipts. If something happened to me, the evidence would survive. Michael's next strategy was financial warfare, designed to force my dependency. He canceled my health insurance, claiming I was no longer eligible as a dependent on his policy. He closed the joint checking account we had opened after Patrick's death, leaving me without access to money for groceries or medication. He contacted the utility companies, informing them that the property was changing ownership and service should be discontinued. But I had been preparing for this assault, using Catherine's financial research. A discreet attorney in Delaware had helped me establish a small trust fund, seeded with money from Patrick's life insurance policy that Michael didn't know existed. The trust was designed specifically to protect elderly clients from financial exploitation by family members. When the heating oil ran out in January, I had backup funds to arrange delivery. When Michael tried to cancel my prescription benefits, I paid cash at the pharmacy using money he couldn't touch. He was trying to force me into dependency, but I maintained my independence through careful planning and the kind of stubbornness that comes from knowing you are fighting for your daughter's memory. The psychological pressure was more difficult to combat. Michael began calling the local police, reporting that I was confused, wandering around the property at night, possibly suffering from dementia. The officers who responded were kind but concerned. They had known me for decades, watched me raise my children, seen me care for Patrick during his illness, but they were required to document Michael's complaints and forward them to Adult Protective Services. Mrs. Sullivan, Officer Martinez said during one of these visits, "Your son seems very worried about you. He says you have been talking about conspiracies, claiming your daughter was murdered. That must be very difficult for him to hear." I understood the trap Michael was setting. Any mention of Catherine's research would be dismissed as grief-induced delusion. Any evidence I presented would be seen as an elderly woman's desperate attempt to blame someone for a tragic accident. Michael was using my love for my daughter against me, turning my quest for justice into evidence of mental illness. A caseworker named Linda Martinez visited monthly to assess my mental state and living conditions. She was a thoughtful woman in her 40s, bilingual, with the kind of gentle authority that comes from years of dealing with family crises. During our conversations, I was careful to appear competent and self-sufficient. I served her homemade cookies, discussed current events, demonstrated my ability to manage household finances and medical appointments. But Linda was perceptive. During her third visit, she asked directly about the family conflict. "Your son seems very concerned about your safety and well-being," she said. "He has requested multiple evaluations and expressed willingness to assume guardianship responsibilities. But you seem quite capable of independent living. Can you help me understand the situation?" I made a calculated decision to trust her. I showed her Catherine's notebook and laptop files, explaining about the suspicious circumstances surrounding my daughter's death, Michael's financial problems, and his attempts to force me from my home. Linda reviewed the evidence carefully, taking notes and asking detailed questions. "Mrs. Sullivan," she said finally, "these are serious allegations. If your daughter was investigating your son's business practices and died under questionable circumstances, this could be a criminal matter rather than a family dispute." She was right, but proving criminal activity would require resources and expertise I didn't possess. Michael had been careful to maintain plausible deniability. His phone records showed he was home when Catherine died. The accident scene had been compromised by fire. Physical evidence was minimal. However, Linda's assessment would carry significant weight in any guardianship proceedings. Her report emphasized my mental competency, my ability to live independently, and her concerns about the motives behind Michael's intervention attempts. She recommended that no guardianship action be taken unless my condition significantly deteriorated. Michael was furious when he learned about Linda's conclusions. He demanded a second opinion from a different caseworker, claiming that I had manipulated the evaluation process. He hired a private geriatric psychiatrist to conduct an independent assessment, hoping for a diagnosis that would support his guardianship petition. The psychiatrist, Dr. Hoffman, spent 2 hours interviewing me and reviewing my medical history. He administered cognitive tests that reminded me of Catherine's environmental surveys, detailed methodical, designed to reveal patterns that weren't immediately obvious. He asked about my daily routines, discussed my understanding of financial and legal matters, probed for signs of confusion or delusion. At the end of the session, he smiled and shook my hand with genuine warmth. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said, "you are sharper than people half your age. Anyone suggesting you need guardianship either doesn't know you very well or has ulterior motives for the suggestion." His written report concluded that I showed no signs of cognitive impairment, maintained excellent self-care abilities, and demonstrated sound judgment in managing my affairs. He noted that family conflicts over inheritance were common sources of false allegations regarding elderly mental capacity. Michael's guardianship petition was denied. The judge noted that multiple professional evaluations had found no evidence supporting claims of mental incompetency. Furthermore, the court was concerned about apparent financial motivations behind the petition, particularly given the ongoing property dispute. But Michael wasn't finished. If he couldn't have me declared incompetent, he would try a more direct approach. One evening in March, as snow began falling across the mountains like a shroud, he arrived at my house with a bottle of wine and an apologetic expression that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Mom," he said, "I think we have both let this situation get out of hand. Stephanie and I have been talking, and we realize we have been insensitive to your grief over Catherine. We would like to start over, rebuild our relationship." He opened the wine, an expensive bottle that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. We sat in the living room, surrounded by Patrick's handmade furniture and Catherine's nature books. Michael asked about my health, my daily routines, whether I was lonely living alone in such a large house. "I have been thinking," he said, his voice carefully modulated. "Maybe we approached this wrong. Instead of assisted living, what if you moved closer to us? Pittsburgh has excellent senior communities, much more active than anything around here. You could have a nice apartment, access to cultural events, medical facilities. We could visit more often." It sounded reasonable, even caring. But I noticed he was drinking very little while, encouraging me to finish my glass. His concern felt rehearsed, like he had practiced this conversation in advance. And there was something odd about the wine's aftertaste, slightly bitter beneath the grape and alcohol. "That is thoughtful of you," I replied, pretending to sip while actually just wetting my lips. "But I am not ready to leave this place. Too many memories, too much of your father's work. Maybe in a few years, when I am truly too old to manage alone." Michael's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. The mask of concern slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. "But Mom, you are already struggling. The house is too big. The winters are harsh. You are isolated from medical care. What if something happened? What if you fell or had a medical emergency?" The wine was making me drowsy, despite my minimal consumption. My words felt thick when I spoke. "I have neighbors. I have doctors in town. Mrs. Peterson checks on me every day. I am not helpless, Michael." "Of course not," he said quickly, reaching over to refill my glass. "But think about Catherine. She worried about you being alone out here. She mentioned it several times before the accident. Hearing him use Catherine's memory to manipulate me cut through the wine's fog like a blade. My daughter had never worried about me living alone. She had lived here herself, knew I was perfectly capable of independence." Michael was lying, using my grief as a weapon. I excused myself to use the bathroom, but instead went to the kitchen and quietly dumped the remaining wine down the sink. When I returned, Michael was examining Catherine's field notebooks, flipping through pages of her careful observations about local wildlife with the casual disrespect of someone handling garbage. "You know," he said, "Catherine always had her head in the clouds. All this environmental stuff, these notebooks about birds and trees. She never understood practical matters, financial realities. It is probably good that she didn't have to deal with adult responsibilities." The casual cruelty of his words sobered me completely. He was speaking about his dead sister, like she had been a burden, a child who had never grown up. The brother who had once built snow forts with Catherine, who had taught her to tie her shoes, who had carried her piggyback when she got tired on family hikes. That person was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. "I think you should leave now," I said quietly. Michael set down the notebook and smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. "Mom, you are not making sense. We were having a good conversation, working things out." "No, we weren't. You were trying to drug me and convince me to abandon the only home I have ever known. You are using Catherine's death to manipulate me, and I will not tolerate it." His mask finally slipped completely. The caring son disappeared, replaced by someone cold and calculating. "You cannot stay here forever, Mother. You are an old woman living alone in the middle of nowhere." Accidents happen, Catherine learned that lesson. The threat was unmistakable. He was telling me that what happened to Catherine could happen to me too. But he had made a crucial mistake. He had admitted that Catherine's death was no accident. "Get out," I said, standing despite the lingering effects of whatever he would put in the wine. "Get out and don't come back." Michael gathered his coat slowly, deliberately, like a predator savoring the fear of cornered prey. "You are making a mistake. I am trying to help you, but you are too stubborn to accept it. When you change your mind, and you will, I will be waiting." After he left, I sat alone in the living room, shaking with anger and fear, but also with clarity. Michael had revealed his true nature, confirmed my suspicions about Catherine's death, and threatened my life. The time for defensive tactics had ended. Now I needed to go on the offensive, but first I needed allies. The next morning, I drove to the county sheriff's office and requested a meeting with Detective Ross. I brought Catherine's laptop, her notebook, a recording of Michael's threats from the previous evening, and documentation of his attempts to gain guardianship and seize the property. Detective Ross listened more carefully this time. The combination of evidence was compelling, even if individual pieces remained circumstantial. He agreed to